Welcome to Brain Strength, the series where this average jabroni decides to do a couple athletic things while teaching you a thing or two about sports psychology along the way. I'm your host, RJ Lynch, mental performance consultant, with my master's in sports psychology. Let's get this thing started. So in this episode of Brain Strength, we're going to be focusing on what psychology does to affect injury and how it all plays together to determine whether or not someone is more likely or less likely to be injured during sport, practice, and so on. So before I get really into the weeds of it, the science, all the things that are probably going to bore some of you but intrigue others, is that I hate the terminology injury prevention, because in most modern usings of the word, it's either used in a falsehood or it comes down to a matter of semantics that I really don't like arguing back and forth. Why I say it's used in a falsehood is because there really is no guarantee that doing X, Y, Z will prevent an injury from happening. You can affect the likelihood, but you can never truly prevent. You increase resilience, you increase just the body's ability to adapt and decrease the liabilities and the faults that are within. But at the end of the day, if you land on someone's foot in a basketball game and twist something, tear an ACL, no matter what you do is going to really affect that. A giant linebacker blindsides you from behind and lays you out is not going to change things. Landing funky on a shoulder, yeah, you might be able to lessen the chance of it popping out if it's stronger, but if it pops out, it's going to pop out. So at the end of the day, neither strength and conditioning or sports psych truly prevent injuries. They just decrease the likelihood of them. And I really want to make sure that is what you're trying to get out of this, that what I tell you is not going to prevent it. So if you get hurt, but knowing that by doing some of these things, paying attention to this, you're going to decrease the likelihood of something catastrophic happening. And at the end of the day, regardless of what you're doing in this weight room, what you're doing on the field, what you're doing with the brain stuff, even if it doesn't stop an injury from happening, prevent it from occurring, you're also going to probably increase the performance, make things just better overall by doing these things as well. So there really is no downside to giving things a try, paying attention to it. It just comes down to genetics, comes down to happenstance, it comes down to luck. So before we can really talk about how we can prevent or reduce the likelihood of injury, we have to first understand what causes injury. And there's about 3 different models I'll kind of touch on briefly and explain. And the first is the stress and injury model. So in this model, it talks about there's an event happens, how our body, how our mind responds, then determines if we become injured or not. So our response then is determined by our history. So if you already have bad ankles, bad knees, bad shoulders from other things in the past, no matter what you do from a strength or mental side, you're more likely to suffer that injury because the body is going to respond the way it always has.
I was born with glass bones and paper skin.
The next one's personality. As if you're someone who's already very stressed, very high strung, what you're doing is your brain, your body is sending more resources to handle your stress, handle your anxiety, that is putting them elsewhere. So if you're being 100 miles an hour, stressed all the time, not sleeping, not recovering, then when something happens, your body's like, I'm just trying to keep you alive, buddy.
I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. If I push it any harder, the whole thing will blow.
And you crash, you burn, and it goes that way. The next one comes down to coping skills, which is along that same route. The more you're able to cope with other factors, deal with other things that happen in your life, the less that your body has to put resources to that, and the more it can focus on making sure things are there. The way I like to think about it is your brain and body only have so much bandwidth. And the more that you're focusing on all these other things, the test that you've got coming up, the relationship that just ended, the pressure of a game, the more you're focused there, the more that your body's energies, the more its focus goes to that it can't really think about how to respond when something goes wonky, which is why you'll see that people who are less stressed and less anxious just are injured less. Their body can focus on staying alive and not falling apart. The next model or area I want to look at is the idea of overtraining risk and outcome. So the first thing we look at is what kind of risks are there. So someone who's in the middle of a transition, going from high school to college, more stressful, more things going on there, not adapted to the training style, the training level of the coaches. This can affect then things down the line. Or the other piece is fitness level. There's a reason more people tend to get hurt at the beginning of a season, at the very end of the season, than they do over the course of it. Early on, you have a lot of the things that come down from, I'm going into my cross-country season, my coach expected that I ran X amount of miles into the season, and I did not run it all. So all of a sudden, the coach puts you in those first few workouts thinking you did X amount of miles, and what happens? You break. Then at the end of the season, just because of the ebbs and flows of it, your fitness level, your exhaustion just kind of go this way. You become more exhausted. You actually generally become less fit to a point. You're usually not as strong, not as fast, because you're just tired. Your body's getting a little bit out of shape. It's great in play, but terrible elsewhere. So then what happens? Oh, you go to do something you could early in the season when you were healthier, when you felt better, and now you went to do it and you tore something. Then these risks generally lead to different early signs. So shin splints, nagging tight hamstrings, a hitch in your shoulder, things like this. These little things that you can generally play through are signs like, something's not right. And then from here, there's one of two responses. Either you're like, oh yeah, my hamstrings have felt like complete trash for the last 2 weeks. I should probably just take this day off. So you take the day off, maybe you take another one easy, and they're feeling better, like, okay, I can get back into it. For the person who decides that, hey, I'm not going to pay attention to these early signs, what happens is they don't take the time off, they push too hard, they become injured, and things just suck, and they are out for long term. That's the outcome. The final model to go over is what we call the biopsychosocial risk profile. So depending on all these different things that go on are going to determine when something happens, are you hurt or not? So biological, how are you growing? How are your mechanics? Like people who have different length tendons tend to be more affected by certain movements. Physical standpoints. What's the weather like? Is there a crowd? Many of us have probably seen those basketball courts where, hey, all of a sudden, they decide to put the fans too close, and then you're running a chase ball and you go into the crowd and something tears. Psychological. How are your motives and attitudes? Going back to some of our earlier models. If you're very stressed, if you're someone who's a very negative outlook on things, you're more likely to get hurt doing them. And then sociocultural. So this is more look at the culture, the organization stress. Are you in a place that puts so much emphasis on winning that you're not going to take days off? You're not going to pay attention? Are they a group that has a coach that just believes that if I can just run these people into the ground, the strongest will survive and will win? Well, what does that do? It runs certain people into the ground, and sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. So in summary of kind of all those models, it comes down to how do you respond to stress? What happens with stress there? What stresses do you have? What's your personality like? Are you someone who's very positive? Are you easygoing? Do things kind of just roll off you, including injuries? Or are you someone that's so high-strung that you break? Think of a piece of string. If you just have a piece of string and you can play with it, it doesn't break. If you pull it to its outmost tightest spot and really come down with some force, it's going to snap. History of other stressors, other things. Like I said, do you have bad ankles, bad shoulders, bad knees? It's going to correlate to a better chance of getting hurt later. How do you cope when things come? And then just general well-being. Depression, unhappiness, not sleeping, not taking care of yourself, these things are just going to have a better chance of hurting you later on. So what are the things that you can do to start preventing injury or becoming more resilient to it? First off, sleep. I really shouldn't have to say this, I feel, but there's still people that don't get. The more you get in the zone of sleep that you need, the less likely you are to get hurt. For two reasons. A, your body's fully recovered. So if you only sleep 4 hours, your body doesn't really get to recover all the way. The muscles don't get healed. Go put more damage on them, they break. The other reason that sleep can be very helpful is that if you become very distracted, if you have issues with things, think of a lineman, think of a basketball player. If you're lollygagging through it, you're going to miss important things. You're going to miss that linebacker, that defensive line coming at you. Your vision's not as great as it is, so you don't really understand how fast that ball is coming at you or where the people are. So you just need to sleep, and it's going to help you out. Next one is mindful breathing. As I will go over later with other mindfulness things I talk about in other videos or have talked about in other videos, taking those deep breaths, what it does is it just calms the nervous system. It calms that stress that's going on already and brings you back to a point where you're like, okay, I'm fine. I'm all right. Next up is relaxation drills. Someone who's very tense, again, like that very pulled string, is more likely to become injured because their muscles are at a spot where any more tension, anything else going on is going to break them and they're going to fall apart. So if you can go through things that just relax them, brings you back to a steadiness, you're going to be better off. Rolling out and breathing on one of these can really just help. Even if the rolling out itself doesn't do a whole lot, there is a little back and forth there on how much is placebo versus what's actually helpful. Just taking that moment to breathe and actually focus on relaxing the muscle just helps you get to the spot where you're like, okay, I'm going to be fine. I can get into this workout. Next one's a little bit different. It's more focused on imagery. And the reason we add in this idea of technique imagery is going back to the one model where I talked about the biology of things. If your run mechanics suck, if you're overstretching, you're more likely to pull a hamstring, something like that, or push too hard there. If you can take time to just mentally visualize, to picture that motion, work on your technique without putting more stress on the thing that's already falling apart, the more likely you are to do it in real time and then prevent the injury that those bad mechanics are going to occur. Maybe you have a certain hitch in how you throw or hit something with your hand. You can think through that, practice in your mind without doing it more poorly, the less like you are to then put it in a spot where it's going to get hurt. And then lastly is the goal setting, focusing on those process over the results. One of the reasons we push through minor injuries, we push through things is we're so focused on, I have to win, I have to do this, I have to accomplish this, that we get to the point where it's like, oh, now I've pushed too far. If you focus on daily practice, saying those short-term goals, like, am I doing these things right? It's also going to let you know of like, hey, I'm not hitting my paces. I'm not hitting my reps because of how my hamstring, how my shoulder, how my back's feeling. Maybe I have to take a step back so that I can hit those things again, knowing that if I can't, I'm never going to hit my big goal of winning a championship, winning a national title, whatever it is. So by saying these little goals, they act as little check-ins to make sure that we become less hurt. And that's just really a little touchstone of some of the things you can do, some of the outlook on it. What are we going after? We're going after the stresses. We're going after just how we respond, how we look at things. And the more that we're able to center, the more we're able to be present, be in the moment, be relaxed, the more likely we are to just perform well. That's all I have for today. Hope gives you a little bit of idea of how you can use the mental skills to prevent injury. So with that, if I say anything today that offends you, please forgive me. If you say anything in the comments that offend me a bit, know I'm going to forgive you in the end. So until next time, brain strength out.